Hi everyone, Dave here at East Rosebud Fly and Tackle. Today I'm going to show you how to tie a fruit roll-up. This was created by Willy Self. He's a Bozeman area fisherman. It's not a complicated fly to tie. We sell a lot of them every year. It's an outstanding leech pattern. As I hope you can see, it's fairly translucent so that the fish can see through it. It gives a lot of movement. I'm just using a Cyclops brass bead on this, although you could use tungsten. One of the nice things about this pattern is how light it is. My friends also tell me it's an excellent carp fly if you're into that type of thing. But the nice thing about this, if you want to fish it deep, you can fish it on a full sink or a sink tip line. However, because it's so light, you can use a floating line and dab around the edges of weed beds and pockets. All fish like leeches, from pike all the way down to sunfish. They all like leeches. We also carry these. This is a black. We also have these in brown and olive, which are also good colors for leeches. We're going to be using a dubbing loop technique on this. I'll try to do a good job of explaining it. This is a 3X long streamer hook. Again, a TMC 5263 would be fine. I'm using a fairly heavy thread because we're using a dubbing loop. This is 6/0 Vivus. You could also use something like a 3/0 uni thread or something like that. So I have the bead on the hook. Of course, the small end goes on first, and we're simply going to start our thread right behind the bead. Build a little bit of a dam here. We don't have to be extensive. We're going to be bringing material right up to the bead, and then just wrap a nice smooth thread base on the hook shank all the way down to the end of the shank, which is right at the back of the barb. Then I'm going to come back forward a little farther. It's easy to miss on this fly, but there actually is some holographic silver flashabou on this. I'm going to use just a single piece here. When I tie in materials like this that are fairly slick, I like to double them over so that they don't pull out. So I'm simply tying it in with a couple of wraps. Then I'm going to bring this end over and double it. Bring it back towards the back of the hook. Hold the two pieces on top of the hook. And wrap back down to the end of our thread base. Again, this prevents this material from pulling out. And we'll trim it to length here in just a second. Now, for the actual tail, I'm using scud back, which we carry in both 1/8 and 1/4 inch diameters in a variety of colors. I'm using black here for this black leech. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim one end of it into a bit of a tapered semicircle. You don't have to spend a lot of time on this. I don't think it's all that important. Alright, and since this is thin material, we don't need to tie it all the way up against the back of the bead. And some of the commercial flies we have very long tails. I prefer mine to be about a hook length. So we're going to measure a hook length and then a little extra to tie it in with and cut it off. Now when we put this thin skin on the hook, we want to envelop the hook. We want this to wrap around the hook as close to the center as we can. So simply pinch it, get a soft loop started over it, try to keep it centered as you wrap back, and I'm just going to wrap back over it until I'm at the end of the tail. Okay. Now I'll bring my thread forward to the hook point. And this is because when we make our dubbing loop, the materials won't spin if they're hitting the hook. While I'm back here, I'll go ahead and trim this holographic flashabou to be about the same length as the tail. Now what I'm going to be using as the body material, the dubbing, is this STS trilobal dub in this black leech. This is a fairly long fiber dubbing, which is what you want for a dubbing loop. I'm simply going to pull some out of the pack. Now, a dubbing loop is simply a loop of thread that you incorporate into your tie This allows you to incorporate any number of materials: long fiber dubbing, ostrich herl, peacock, rubber legs, anything you can think of. The EP brushes that you buy are simply dubbing loops made out of fine wire. We're going to make this out of our standing thread. There are several different tools you can use to make a dubbing loop. You can use something as simple as a shepherd's crook. You can use something a little more complex like this. I'm going to be using a Dr. Slick's dubbing loop twister. You can see this has spring arms on it. What I'm going to do is simply, let me throw a half hitch in here so I don't lose my spot. Okay. I'm simply going to bring the thread down one arm and over the other and bring my thread back up. Now I'm going to make this longer because I need a longer dubbing loop, so it's going to kind of disappear from view here from you. You can make the loop as long as you want to. Bring your thread back up, wrap it a couple of times right where your dubbing loop starts to secure it. Then I wrap my thread twice around the loop. This closes the top end of the loop. If you don't do this, the materials at the top of the loop will never be twisted firmly because the loop will never close. But once we've formed our loop, then we can bring our thread forward to where our loop is going to end and where we'll tie it off. Now, there's several different ways you can put materials in your dubbing loop. You can simply spread the loop with your fingers and insert materials into it. You can also use one of the magic clips. That's very helpful for short loops. Here is a new pair of tweezers from Loon Outdoors. The nice thing about it is they're parallel sided all the way down the length of them, so they hold dubbing and other materials nice and securely. So I'm simply going to tease this material out just a little bit so it's not quite so bulky. And then grab with my tweezers here, like so. Then I'm going to bring my dubbing loop, separate the strands a little bit with my finger to try to keep these materials more secure, particularly if you're adding different colored or different types of materials in your loop. You can use some high-tack dubbing wax and spread it inside the loop on the thread to help keep things in position. With these tweezers, I can put everything in position at one time. Simply insert it in there, let the loop close, take your tweezers away. Now you can position your materials in the loop, slide them up or down, kind of even them up in the loop. And then simply I'm just going to take my finger right on top of the dubbing loop tool and spin the tool. As this spins, it spins the thread, it tightens the thread, and it incorporates this material into the loop, like so. It's not difficult to do. You can spin your thread so tight that it'll actually break, but with this type of spinner, it'll pretty much stop spinning when it's reached its maximum. Now before I wrap the loop, I'll just grab the end of my loop with my hackle pliers and pull it off of the spinner, like so. All right. Now we're going to wrap this forward. We will brush this a lot when we're done with the fly. But for right now, we just want to concentrate on wrapping. We're going to wrap 6 or 7 times with space loops. Try to sweep your fibers back as you wrap to reduce the amount of fibers that you trap. Keep wrapping forward, sweeping this back very much like a soft hackle. Bring this all the way up to behind the bead, nice and tight. All right. Then we're going to bring your dubbing loop forward and trap behind it with your tying thread. Make several tight wraps to make sure you have this secured. And then we'll simply cut off the excess dubbing loop, like so. So this is what's left of the loop. And before I tie off, I'm going to make several wraps of thread here to make sure I have the end of that dubbing loop secure. And then whip finish it as usual. Go ahead and do a double whip finish. Alright, the next project is to sweep these fibers out. And again, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can use just a regular brass bristle brush for cleaning firearms. You can use your bodkin to pick it out, although that's very time consuming. This is a brush that we carry that's made not only for dubbing brushes, but if you use yarn as an indicator on your line, you can use this to brush out your yarn before you apply your floatant. Now I'm simply going to get this brush and tease these fibers out. As you see, some of the fibers that weren't caught in the dubbing loop come out, which is fine. We can reuse these. And the whole idea of this, as I showed you at the beginning, is to make a halo of these fibers. These fibers will also trap air bubbles, and the length of the fibers give it some good movement, which fish are always looking for. If you have some fibers that are extra long, you can always trim them with scissors or use the scissors that barbers use to thin out your hair. We carry those here. Brush it good. This is why I used a heavy thread, so I can brush it vigorously without breaking my loop. There you have it, the fruit roll-up. Very popular, very effective fly, particularly for flat water fishing. Easy to tie. Don't be afraid of dubbing loops. They're not difficult to do, and it gives you a variety of effects that you can't obtain otherwise. As always, thanks for joining in. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll see you next time.